The harsh Montana sun beat down on Matthew Blackwood's weathered face as he surveyed the fence line of the Rocking Bee Ranch. At 48, his once jet-black hair was now streaked with silver, and deep lines had formed around his eyes, not just from squinting against the glaring sun, but from the weight of memories that had haunted him for the past decade. The ranch had been his salvation after returning from the war between the states, a place where he could build something meaningful with his own two hands. Now, with 5,000 acres and one of the finest herds of cattle in the territory, Matthew had earned respect throughout Willow Creek County. But respect didn't warm his bed at night, and it didn't ease the ache of loneliness that had been his constant companion since Caroline left. Pulling his hat lower to shield his eyes, Matthew turned his horse back toward the main house. The two-story structure stood as a testament to his success. Solid pine logs harvested from the surrounding mountains, a wide wraparound porch, and glass windows imported all the way from St. Louis. It was the house he'd promised to build her, finished 3 years after she'd already gone. Smoke rose from the chimney where Mrs. Abernathy, his housekeeper of 7 years, would be preparing supper. The smell of fresh bread would soon be wafting through the house. But like every other night, he'd eat alone at the long oak table, built for a family he never had. "Mr. Blackwood!" The voice came from young Jimmy, one of the ranch hands, who came galloping up the path. "Stagecoach just arrived in town." "Sheriff Turner sent me to fetch you. Says there's someone you need to see." The boy's face was flushed with excitement, but his eyes held something else. Concern, perhaps, or uncertainty. "Did Turner say who it was?" Matthew asked, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. The sheriff rarely sent for him unless there was trouble. Rustlers, land disputes, or the occasional troublemaker passing through. Jimmy shook his head. "No, sir. Just said to tell you it was urgent and personal-like." The boy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "He said to tell you, it concerns a lady from your past. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to know." Matthew felt the blood drain from his face. And had only been one woman in his life who mattered, and she had left Willow Creek on a stagecoach headed east in 1868. He'd received one letter 6 months later from Boston, telling him not to wait, that she had found a new life among civilized people and intended to marry a banker's son. That had been the last he'd heard of Caroline Winters, until now, apparently. Without another word, Matthew spurred his horse toward town, his mind racing faster than the animal beneath him. Willow Creek had grown considerably since Matthew first settled in the area. What had once been little more than a trading post and a saloon now boasted a proper main street with a hotel, general store, blacksmith, and even a small schoolhouse. The stagecoach station sat at the far end, and a small crowd had gathered, unusual for a regular arrival. Sheriff Turner, a barrel-chested man with a gray mustache that seemed to have a life of its own, stood on the boardwalk outside his office, clearly waiting for Matthew. "Blackwood," Turner nodded as Matthew dismounted. "She's inside. Wanted to wait there instead of causing a scene. Folks are curious enough as it is." "Caroline?" Matthew asked, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid that speaking her name might somehow make this all disappear, like one of the mirages that danced across the plains in the summer heat. The sheriff's expression softened. "Yes, but Matthew," he placed a hand on the rancher's arm, stopping him before he could enter. "She's not the same woman who left. Life's been hard on her." "Just," Prepare yourself." With a nod, Matthew pushed through the door into the sheriff's office. At first, he didn't see her. Then a figure rose from a chair in the corner, wrapped in a dark traveling cloak, despite the summer heat. She turned, and Matthew felt his heart stop. Caroline's once vibrant auburn hair was now streaked with gray and pulled back severely from her face. But it was her face that caused his breath to catch. The left side was marked by a web of scars that pulled at her eye and the corner of her mouth. The green eyes that had once sparkled with life and mischief now regarded him warily, filled with a wariness that spoke of pain and rejection. "Hello, Matthew," she said softly, her voice at least unchanged, the same gentle timbre that had whispered words of love to him under star-filled Montana skies. "Caroline," he managed, removing his hat, fingers gripping the brim so tightly his knuckles turned white. I never expected to see you again." A sad smile twisted her scarred features. "I never expected to return. But fate has a way of closing circles, doesn't it?" She hesitated, then slowly reached up and removed her cloak. She wore a simple navy blue traveling dress, but what caught Matthew's attention was how thin she was, almost fragile compared to the vibrant young woman he remembered. "What happened?" The words escaped before he could stop them, and he immediately regretted his bluntness. "My husband's banking house burned 3 years ago. He pulled me out, but—" Her hand unconsciously rose to her scarred cheek. "He couldn't bear to look at me afterward. The divorce was quiet but absolute. His family made sure I was provided for, at least. Enough to make a journey back west." She paused, her eyes never leaving his. "I had nowhere else to go, Matthew. No family left. But I'll understand if you want me to continue on to San Francisco on tomorrow's stage." Matthew stood frozen, a storm of emotions raging within him. Anger at the man who had discarded her because of scars, grief for the years they had lost, and something else, something that had never truly died in the decade since she left. Before he could respond, Caroline stepped closer, her scarred face fully revealed in the light streaming through the office window. "Do you still want me? Like this?" she asked, her voice breaking on the last words, eyes shining with unshed tears and a vulnerability that pierced straight through to his soul. Matthew's breath caught in his throat as the world seemed to narrow to just this moment, just this woman standing before him. The rancher froze, time suspended as a decade of loneliness and longing crashed against the shore of this unexpected second chance. Then, almost without conscious thought, he closed the distance between them, gently taking her trembling hands in his calloused ones. "Now more than ever," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. And in that moment, both knew that the circle had indeed closed, bringing them back to where they were always meant to be. The journey back to the Rocking Bee Ranch was made in relative silence, not from discomfort, but from the overwhelming nature of their reunion. Caroline sat beside Matthew on the buckboard wagon, occasionally stealing glances at the man who had once been her entire world, a man who had somehow found it in his heart to welcome her back. The setting sun painted the vast Montana landscape in hues of gold and amber, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. "Your ranch," Caroline said as they crested a hill and the full expanse of the Rocking Bee came into view. "Matthew, it's magnificent." Below them stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed, outbuildings constructed with care, and at the center, the 2-story log home that seemed to anchor everything around it. Matthew's eyes followed hers, seeing his life's work through her perspective. Built it piece by piece. Sometimes I think every fence post and floorboard holds a memory. Some good, some hard. He glanced at her. I finished the house 3 years after you left. Built it just like I promised you I would. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. All this time, you never stopped loving you? Matthew finished for her, his voice gentle. No, though God knows I tried. He guided the horses down the slope toward home. There were other women over the years, respectable widows, daughters of neighboring ranchers, even courted the school teacher for a spell. But none of them were you. As they approached the main house, several ranch hands stopped their work to observe their boss returning with a woman beside him. A rare enough sight to draw attention, but respect kept them from openly staring. Mrs. Abernathy appeared on the porch, her curiosity evident, but her demeanor professional as always. Mr. Blackwood, she nodded. I've prepared supper as usual. Should I? Her words stopped abruptly as she caught sight of Caroline's face. But to her credit, she recovered quickly. Should I set an extra place at the table, sir? Yes, Mrs. Abernathy. This is Miss Caroline Winters, an old friend who will be staying with us. Matthew helped Caroline down from the wagon. Please prepare the guest room as well. Later that evening, after a quiet supper where Mrs. Abernathy had tactfully given them privacy, Matthew and Caroline sat on the porch, watching darkness settle over the mountains. A lantern cast a warm glow between them, illuminating Caroline's profile. The perfect right side she kept turned toward him out of habit. You don't need to hide from me, Matthew said softly. The scars don't matter to me, Caroline. She turned fully toward him then, allowing him to see her completely in the lamplight. How can they not? They're a constant reminder that I left you for another man, a man who couldn't love me enough to see past this. Her finger traced the web of scars. Sometimes I wonder if it was God's punishment for my foolishness. Matthew shook his head firmly. Don't ever think that. No God I believe in works that way. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Why did you go, Caroline? All these years, I've wondered what I could have done differently. Caroline was quiet for a long moment, collecting her thoughts. I was 22, Matthew. You were building this ranch, working from dawn until past dusk. I was alone so much of the time, and this land, it was so wild, so untamed. When my aunt wrote from Boston describing the parties, the theaters, the shops, it seemed like a dream compared to the harsh reality of frontier life. She sighed deeply. I convinced myself I wasn't strong enough for this life, that I wasn't strong enough for you. And now? Matthew asked, his voice barely audible above the chirping of crickets that had begun their nightly chorus. Now I know that true strength isn't found in fancy drawing rooms or measured by how delicate one's hands are. Her scarred lips curved into a sad smile. It's found in endurance, in beginning again when everything is lost, in coming back to face the man whose heart you broke, not knowing if he'll turn you away. Matthew reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. I built this house for a family, Caroline, for children to fill its rooms with laughter. Maybe we're older now. Maybe life has left its marks on both of us, but that dream doesn't have to die. Matthew, she whispered, you need to know something. The fire, it did more than scar my face. The doctors say I can never bear children. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held firm. Then we'll fill this house with children who need a home. he said without hesitation. There's no shortage of orphans in this territory. Children who've lost parents to disease, accidents, Indian raids. Children who need love as much as we need to give it. For the first time since her arrival, Caroline's smile reached her eyes, transforming her face with a beauty that transcended any scar. You always could see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. Tomorrow, Matthew said, I'll take you to see the rest of the ranch, show you the changes, introduce you to the hands. He paused, suddenly uncertain. Unless you'd prefer to rest after your journey? Caroline squeezed his hand. I've rested enough. I want to see everything. To know your world completely. Her voice grew softer. I won't make the same mistake twice, Matthew. If you truly want me to stay, I'm here for good. I do, he said simply. I want you by my side for whatever years the good Lord grants us. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that made the hardships of Montana winters seem like distant memories. After breakfast, Matthew took Caroline on a tour of the ranch operations. She insisted on riding astride rather than side saddle, wearing a pair of trousers borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy's son, who occasionally helped on the ranch. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully, their initial curiosity about her scars quickly forgotten as they observed her genuine interest in the workings of the ranch. You've built something remarkable, Caroline said as they paused on a hillside overlooking a valley where the main herd grazed. I didn't understand before how much this land meant to you, how building something from nothing was healing after what you saw in the war. Matthew nodded, surprised at her insight. After Gettysburg, I couldn't stomach being around too many people. The open spaces here, they gave me room to breathe again, room to forget. He glanced at her. You were the only person who made the memories recede completely. As they rode back toward the main house, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught their attention. A rider was approaching at speed. Jimmy, the young ranch hand, looking agitated. He reined his horse to a sliding stop before them. Mr. Blackwood, there's trouble in town. Sheriff Turner sent me to fetch you right away. Says you need to come armed. Matthew's expression darkened. What kind of trouble? 3 men rode in on this morning's stage. Been asking all over town about a woman with a scarred face. One of them claims to be her husband. Jimmy's eyes flicked nervously to Caroline, whose face had gone deathly pale. Sheriff's holding them at his office for now. But the main one, fancy-dressed fellow with an Eastern accent, he's waving papers around, saying he has legal rights. Caroline's hands tightened on her reins. That's impossible. The divorce was final. I have the papers in my trunk. Matthew's jaw clenched. Stay here at the ranch, he told Caroline. I'll go into town and sort this out. No, she said firmly, a flash of the spirited young woman he once knew shining through. These are my demons to face, Matthew. I won't hide while you fight my battles. Her chin lifted in determination. Besides, my papers are in my trunk at the hotel. We'll need them. They rode into Willow Creek, side by side, drawing curious glances from townspeople who had already heard rumors about the strangers asking questions. Sheriff Turner met them outside his office, his expression grim. Man claims to be Edgar Harrington of Boston, Turner said without preamble. Says his wife Caroline suffered brain damage in a fire and ran away during her recovery. Has papers signed by 2 Boston doctors declaring her mentally unfit to manage her own affairs. The sheriff lowered his voice. He's got 2 hired men with him. Gunmen by the look of them, though they're playing at being respectable. It's a lie, Caroline said, her voice steady despite her pallor. The divorce was granted 3 years ago. Edgar couldn't bear to look at me, couldn't stand the whispers and stares when we went out in society. Her hands trembled slightly, but I never imagined he would go this far. Matthew helped her dismount. "Let's go in. I want to hear what he has to say for himself." Edgar Harrington stood when they entered. A slim, elegantly dressed man in his early 40s, with receding hair and cold eyes that widened momentarily at the sight of Caroline. 2 men flanked him, wearing city clothes that didn't quite disguise their rough nature. "Caroline, my dear," Harrington's voice dripped with false concern. "I've been so worried. Your doctors have been beside themselves since your episode." He took a step toward her, but Matthew moved subtly between them. "Mr. Harrington," Matthew said, his voice deceptively calm, "Miss Winters tells me your divorce was finalized years ago. She has the papers to prove it." A thin smile spread across Harrington's face. "I'm afraid my wife is confused. The fire left her with periods of delusion. These men," he gestured to his companions, "are private investigators I've hired to help bring her home safely to Boston, where she can receive proper care." Sheriff Turner leaned against his desk. "These investigators are carrying an awful lot of firepower for men trailing a confused woman." One of Harrington's men shifted his coat, revealing a holstered revolver. "Dangerous country out here, Sheriff. Man has to protect himself." "Caroline," Harrington said, his voice hardening slightly, "be reasonable. You know you're not well. The doctors all agreed your scarring caused melancholia, delusions. What would your poor departed father say, seeing you in men's clothing, riding astride like some common—" "That's enough," Matthew cut in, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Caroline placed a restraining hand on Matthew's arm. "No, let him speak. I want to hear what's truly brought Edgar all the way from Boston." Her eyes narrowed as she studied her ex-husband. "It can't possibly be concern for my welfare, not after you made it abundantly clear how repulsed you were by my appearance." Something ugly flashed in Harrington's eyes. "You were compensated quite generously in our settlement. $15,000 is a significant sum, money from my family's bank, I might add." And there it was, the real reason for his pursuit. Matthew and Caroline exchanged glances. "The money's gone, isn't it?" Caroline asked. "The bank failed." "That's why you're here. You want to nullify the divorce settlement." Harrington's mask of concern slipped, replaced by cold calculation. "The Harrington Bank suffered a temporary setback. The directors feel that all outstanding obligations should be reviewed, including overly generous divorce settlements to wives who were clearly not in their right minds when agreements were made." He produced a document from his breast pocket. "This court order gives me authority to bring you back to Boston for competency hearings." Sheriff Turner took the paper, studying it carefully before handing it to Matthew. "This is a Massachusetts court order. Has no jurisdiction here in Montana Territory. Federal courts will honor it," Harrington countered smoothly. "And I've taken the liberty of wiring the territorial governor, who assures me he'll provide necessary assistance." Matthew felt a cold fury building inside him. Men like Harrington believed their money and connections placed them above frontier justice, above basic human decency. "The lady isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go," he said quietly. "And who exactly are you to make that determination, mister?" Harrington looked him up and down with thinly veiled contempt. "Blackwood. Matthew Blackwood. I own the Rocking Bee Ranch." Recognition flickered in Harrington's eyes. "Ah, yes. The man Caroline left behind for civilization. How quaint that she sought refuge with you in her confusion." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "But surely, even in these primitive surroundings, legal documents still hold meaning. Before Matthew could respond, the door to the sheriff's office opened, and Mrs. Abernathy entered, looking flustered but determined. "Begging your pardon for the interruption, Sheriff, but this just arrived by telegraph for Miss Winters." She handed Caroline a yellow telegram slip. The operator said it seemed urgent. Caroline read the message, her expression transforming from worry to relief. "It's from Edgar's sister, Margaret." She looked up at her ex-husband, whose face had suddenly lost its certainty. "She warns that you fled Boston ahead of fraud charges. That's you forged bank documents and embezzled funds. That's why you need me declared incompetent, so you can access my settlement through guardianship before your creditors can claim it." The atmosphere in the sheriff's office shifted instantly. Harrington's hired men exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reassessing their employer. "Fraud and embezzlement," Sheriff Turner said thoughtfully. "Serious charges. Maybe I should hold you here while I wire the authorities in Boston to confirm." Harrington's composure cracked. "This is absurd. You have no right." "Actually," the sheriff interrupted, "harboring a fugitive and presenting falsified court documents are crimes in this territory. Serious ones." He opened his desk drawer and removed handcuffs. "I think you'll be staying with us for a few days, Mr. Harrington." What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion. Harrington lunged forward, grabbing Caroline and pulling her against him as a human shield. One of his men drew his weapon, but Matthew was faster. His Colt appeared in his hand as if by magic, and a single shot sent the man's gun clattering to the floor, along with several of his fingers. "Let her go," Matthew said, his voice deadly quiet as he leveled his gun at Harrington's head. "Now. Back away, or I swear I'll—" Whatever threat Harrington intended died in his throat as Caroline drove her elbow hard into his stomach, then stomped viciously on his instep. He doubled over with a wheeze, and she twisted away from him just as Sheriff Turner brought his gun down on the back of Harrington's head. The second hired man raised his hands in surrender. "I was just hired for protection, Sheriff. Didn't sign on for no kidnapping or fraud." Later, after Harrington and his men were securely locked in the town's small jail, Matthew and Caroline stood on the boardwalk outside, still processing the confrontation. "I never thought Edgar capable of such desperation," Caroline said, shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. "He was always so concerned with appearances, with his standing in society." Matthew placed a steadying hand on her back. "Men who value appearances above all else often have the most to hide." He looked down at her with newfound admiration. "You handled yourself well in there." A small, proud smile crossed her face. "Living on the frontier wasn't the only thing I was stronger for than I realized." She gazed down the main street of Willow Creek, then back at Matthew. "Take me home, Matthew, to our home." 2 weeks later, under a perfect blue Montana sky, Matthew and Caroline stood hand in hand before the small white church in Willow Creek. The entire town had turned out for the wedding, along with all the hands from the Rocking Bee. Caroline wore a simple cream dress, her scarred face uncovered and her head held high. At 48 and 32, they knew they were beginning their life together later than most, but the years of separation had only strengthened their appreciation for this second chance. "Do you, Matthew James Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Thompson asked, his voice carrying clearly to the assembled guests. "I do," Matthew answered, his eyes never leaving Caroline's. "And do you, Caroline Elizabeth Winters, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Caroline squeezed Matthew's weathered hands, her voice unwavering. "I do, now and always." As they exchanged rings, Caroline leaned close to Matthew. "Thank you for wanting me, like this," she whispered, echoing her question from that first day. Matthew's answer was the same, but now filled with the certainty of a promise fulfilled. Now more than ever. 6 months later, as winter settled over the Montana Territory, the Rocking Bee Ranch was transformed. The main house, once so empty and quiet, now rang with the voices of children. 3 siblings orphaned when influenza took their parents the previous winter. Matthew and Caroline had given them a home, just as they had promised each other they would. In the evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Matthew and Caroline sat before the fireplace, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the dancing flames. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, while inside, warmth and love had finally filled the home built with such hope and longing. "Do you ever regret coming back?" Matthew asked softly, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Caroline looked up at him, the firelight casting a warm glow on her scarred face, a face he now found as beautiful as the untouched one he had first fallen in love with. "Never," she said simply. "This is where I was always meant to be. It just took me a while to find my way home." Matthew pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Welcome home, Caroline. Welcome home." From the window of the ranch house, the vast Montana landscape stretched out before them, no longer a symbol of isolation but of possibility, a future they would build together, day by day, season by season, forging something beautiful from the challenges life had given them. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.